Tonight, behind bars, a Dawson Creek man is facing weapon charges. Growing pains, rift in the caucus of the BC Conservative Party. And quick response, an injured snowmobiler is airlifted to hospital. Good evening and thank you for joining us. And we begin with new information about a notorious criminal from Dawson Creek. John Omniak is in jail tonight facing a number of weapons charges. Police say just after Joel Freeman was shot to death in the 1000 block of 102nd Avenue on January the 19th, a suspect was spotted running from the scene. Dawson Creek RCMP flooded the downtown court looking for that suspect. Well, John Omniak was spotted by police patrols. He was allegedly walking down the street carrying a wagon full of shotguns that were wrapped in blankets. Police arrested him while the BC Prosecution Service has just recently approved the charges. Nolan Schmidt was later charged in Freeman's murder. Last fall, Omniak spoke to the Fifth Estate about being accused of murdering Tina Nellis, Roy Ely, and Daryl Supernat. He said there is no proof of him doing any of that, adding, he has nothing to do with anyone's death. Omniak has not been charged in connection to the 4 homicides, and it's important to note that none of these accusations have been proven in a court of law. BC Conservative leader John Rustad acknowledging division within his party today. The move comes after 5 caucus members voted against an NDP motion that condemned the U.S. tariffs, among them Peace River North MLA Jordan Keeley, who's claiming Trump's concerns are being brushed off.
Proper diplomacy has to be the answer to this scenario to stop these divisive tactics by the NDP. I'm voting for this motion, but I do not support most of it.
Keeley, speaking for the first time in the legislature yesterday, a motion tabled asked MLAs to support a Team Canada approach that called the tariffs wrong and unjustified. It would respond to future tariffs with, quote, proportionate retaliatory action strategically targeting products and industries in the Republican states. The goal was to deter President Trump from implementing further tariffs. Well, Keeley calling it divisive, with a polarizing tone that would create a bigger divide with the United States and deflects the major problems current facing our province. He called on the NDP to scrap the upcoming increase to the carbon tax and increase refinery capacity to reduce reliance on U.S. oil and gas resources. And in a Facebook post, Keeley criticized, quote, leadership for not addressing Trump's concerns on border security, illegal immigration, drug trafficking, or NATO commitments. The motion ended up passing 86-5, voted no on only by members of the BC Conservatives. Leader John Rustad said his party ran on allowing MLAs more freedoms, and Rustad acknowledged the growing pains the party is facing. The emergency room at the Chetwynd Hospital on diversion today. Once again, the health authority taking to social media to let residents know that the emergency room at the Chetwynd Hospital was closing on Tuesday. They posted the notice just after 2 this afternoon, but failed to say when the diversion actually started. The emergency is expected to reopen tomorrow morning at 8. However, Northern Health not ruling out that may be extended. Staff shortages over the last 4 years continue to plague the hospital, and Northern Health no longer willing to inform the public whether it's a nursing or physician shortage to blame. People needing life-saving care are being asked to call 911 to be transported to the next closest emergency room. That's over an hour away. The Fort Nelson First Nation receiving $1.2 million in federal funding for the Tudeka geothermal project. The geothermal project is a process that involves extracting heat from the Earth's crust, and it's the first of its kind in British Columbia. The First Nation will build a power plant to convert that heat to energy at the former Clark Lake gas field. That's approximately 14 kilometers southwest of Fort Nelson. And once complete, the 100% Indigenous-owned project will power 10,000 homes. It'll also provide economic opportunity for the First Nation and neighboring communities to support a clean energy transition in the north. Natural Resource Canada says the project will help the country reach its goal of net zero emissions by the year 2050. It's one of 7 Indigenous-led projects in British Columbia to receive funding through the Indigenous Natural Resource Partnership Program. Tudeka is expected to be operational by early 2027. Well, crews in Fort St. John have begun clearing storm drains as the Peace region gets its first taste of spring-like weather. The freeze-thaw cycle creating pools of water on streets and parking lots all across the city. Residents are now being asked to do their part by clearing storm drains in front of their homes. The city says crews will also be out this week to begin steaming drains, and motorists are being advised to drive carefully through large puddles and to be on the lookout for new potholes. If flooding threatens your property, you're being asked to contact Public Works or call 311 to report it. And the city of Dawson Creek also asking its residents to call or use the city app to report pooling on city streets to reduce the chance of new potholes forming. And we'll have more on this week's warm-up a little bit later on in weather. A quick response from search and rescue teams in the Peace region leading to a successful rescue of a snowmobiler near the Wolverine Snow Trail just north of Tumbler Ridge. It happened last Friday. Rescuers from North Peace and Tumbler Ridge joined forces with a pilot to reach an injured snowmobiler who was suspected to have a broken leg. And once that person was located, he was airlifted to Fort St. John Hospital and then taken to hospital by a waiting ambulance. The group of sledders activating their InReach SOS, that's a tool used to ping a location during an emergency situation. They then splinted the victim's legs. North Peace Search and Rescue calling their actions a good and quick decision. They also recommend carrying a means of communication in the backcountry should there be an emergency. Now, there's no word on the sledder's condition. However, the avalanche danger rating for the Peace region remains at considerable. Well, there are growing calls for better regulations and safety measures to protect children who ride off-road vehicles. The Canadian Pediatric Society says children and teens make up about a third of off-road vehicle deaths, and it's calling on federal and provincial governments to regulate the use of off-road vehicles the same way they do with cars. Recommendations include requiring children to be at least 16 to drive and at least 12 to be a passenger. And they also want to make government-certified helmets mandatory. Confusion and poor communication are the big takeaways from an analysis of last summer's Chilcotin landslide in the interior of British Columbia. The local First Nation published a report outlining shortfalls in the communication and coordination of the emergency response from the provincial and federal governments. The First Nation says it had to overcome jurisdictional confusion, and the province struggled to share information about the landslide. They're now calling for senior levels of government to ensure they're included in future responses.
Collaborating with the governments in the future on what this looks like. We already have a lot of agreements, but I think in times of emergencies we tend to get a little frazzled and we forget those agreements.
The First Nation is hoping this report will result in them taking the lead on discussions for best practices while also strengthening its relationship with both levels of government. Fallout today from the controversy surrounding Alberta Health Services. One of Danielle Smith's ministers announcing he is stepping down from cabinet. Infrastructure Minister Peter Guthrie says for months he's been voicing concerns about Alberta's healthcare procurement practices. The former lead of Alberta Health Services is suing the province for wrongful dismissal. She says she was going to come forward with allegations of a government kickback scheme and political pressure from within the UCP government to sign private contracts. Another bombshell politically, this time from Newfoundland. The popular Premier Andrew Furey announcing in a big surprise he's resigning. Well, speaking to reporters in St. John's after he made the announcement today, Furey was asked why he was stepping down at such a critical time for his province and for Canada. Here's some of what he had to say today.
We're looking at 4 years of erratic, crazy, bonkers behavior by the President of the United States.
Furey is just 49 years old and not a career politician. He's a doctor by training and says he's going to go back to medicine. He only jumped into politics 5 years ago. Liberal leadership candidates will debate tonight in English after squaring off in French last night. And one moment in particular getting a lot of attention. Mark Carney misspeaking about Hamas while discussing Palestinian statehood.
Hamas, nous sommes d'accord.
We all agree on Hamas, on a two-state
No, we don't agree with
solution.
Hamas.
Chrystia Freeland quickly jumped in to correct Carney, with Carney later clarifying that we are against Hamas and in favor of a two-state solution. Now, after the debate, Freeland defended Carney, saying she interjected to clarify the former bank governor's comments on Hamas because it could have been a dangerous moment. 2 people have been arrested in southern Quebec after the RCMP rescued a group allegedly crossing illegally from the United States into Canada. 4 people and an alleged smuggler were rescued overnight Saturday after an 8-hour search from Border Patrol. Well, they were found suffering from hypothermia and unable to continue their journey. The suspected smuggler and driver have been arrested. RCMP used a Black Hawk helicopter in the operation, one of two recently put into use to support border protection efforts. And in Washington today, Donald Trump announced more potential tariffs that could affect Canada. The U.S. president ordering a new probe into possible new duties on copper imports. Officials say it's intended to build back America's copper industry. Any potential tariff rate would be determined by the investigation, but no specific timeline was given today. The countries that would be most affected are Chile, Canada, and Mexico. They were the top suppliers of refined copper and copper products last year. And after saying multiple times that the United States does not need Canadian energy, Donald Trump now says the Keystone XL pipeline needs to be built. The president posted online that his administration would make approvals easy, and that means an almost immediate start. In the past, Alberta has invested $1.3 billion to build Keystone XL. The pipeline was to run crude oil from Alberta to the U.S. Gulf Coast. It was canceled shortly after Joe Biden was sworn in as U.S. president. However, it was also stalled for more than a decade before that. Well, it's been a tough flu season across Canada, and that's prompting caution from doctors. So what's the difference this year? CTV's Andrew Johnson pinpoints what's behind the surge in severe cases.
It's a flu season that started late, and a week away from March still hasn't peaked.
There's been a lot of influenza cases across the country, and significant hospitalizations associated with that as well.
The latest Canadian Flu Watch report shows the percentage of positive influenza tests right now is the highest recorded in 5 years. Parts of British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec are seeing the biggest jumps. And more flu means more people are feeling sick enough to visit their doctor or head to the emergency room.
We are seeing a lot in the hospital. It is the time in the season that we would expect to see a lot of influenza, and the tests are positive, and I think mixed with a fewer number of people who actually got the vaccine this year. I think that's why we're seeing a lot of worse disease.
New data from BC bears that out. So far this season, 25% of the eligible population is vaccinated. Last year, at this time, the number was more than 28%. That's close to 200,000 people who may be more likely to get very sick.
You know, in 2025, we've had 5 years of vaccine for a variety of reasons, whether it's COVID or RSV or influenza, and I think people are a little bit tired of it. But of course, the disappointing thing is that despite us being tired of it, doesn't mean that the virus is going to give us a break.
Experts say confidence in the public health system has been eroded, and governments need to increase access.
That takes resources, but it really means bringing vaccines to the people rather than bringing people to the vaccine.
This year's delayed flu season is expected to outlast winter, potentially dragging on into April. Andrew Johnson, CTV News, Vancouver.
All right, please do stay tuned because I'll be right back with weather, but as we head to break, I'll look at today's closing market numbers.